Anyone who has seen my previous videos knows that I use this small melting furnace for heat treatment and carburizing of steel. The unit is now 4 years old, and while it has been very useful, it has also caused me quite a bit of frustration. That frustration comes from the fact that the oven is not designed for heat treatment at all, but for melting metals. It is a vertical furnace, intended to suspend a small graphite crucible inside. And those two characteristics are exactly where the problem lies. The crucible capacity, at roughly 1/4 of a litre, is very small, and fishing glowing hot steel parts out of that narrow, deep crucible with long tongs is a recurring hassle every single time. So I started looking for truly small furnaces, with roughly 1 litre of usable volume and a horizontal door. They do exist, but unfortunately their prices are far higher than the roughly €170 I paid for this one. If I could manage to convert this melting furnace into what I actually need, at least twice the usable volume and a horizontal door, I would be a very happy man. So let's take a closer look at how this furnace is built, and see whether it can be modified to do exactly that. This was exactly what I'd hoped for. The construction of the furnace is simple, and one of the main limiting factors turns out to be the refractory ring that holds the crucible. The opening is only about 5.5 centimeters in diameter, while the furnace itself has an internal diameter of roughly 8.5 centimeters and is also about 2.5 centimeters deeper. If I can tilt the furnace and enlarge the opening in that ring, I'm basically already where I want to be. The sketch on the right shows what I have in mind. I can increase the usable volume of the oven by a factor of about 3.5, while at the same time making the external dimensions roughly 30% smaller overall. The outside of the oven does get seriously hot, up to about 165 degrees Celsius, so I plan to use 2 reflective intermediate shields to limit heat radiation downward and toward the electronics enclosure at the back as much as possible. After all, it still has to remain a safe oven, not a space heater with ambitions. The electrical side of this furnace is fairly straightforward as well. There's a temperature controller, in proper jargon a PID, proportional, integral, derivative, which gets its input from a temperature sensor, and on its output sits a solid-state relay that's quite happy to switch series current at mains voltage. The PID itself is a nifty little gadget. It constantly tweaks the amount of power sent to the furnace based on the difference between the measured temperature and the set point. The closer the oven gets to the target temperature, the less energy is pumped into the heating coil. In the end, the temperature can be held within just a few degrees of where you want it. Alright, enough talking. Time to actually cut some metal. I'll start with the angle plate, which first gets the required holes pressed in before it's bent into shape. I think the footage pretty much speaks for itself here, so let's give my brand new, hopefully better sounding AI voice a rest and switch to some nice music instead. There's one small problem left, the door. It's hollow and insulates so poorly that the crucible was always noticeably cooler at the top. Not exactly ideal. So I'm making a filler plug from a piece of refractory brick to fix that little design feature once and for all. Time for the final tests. How good is the insulation I've dreamed up? In theory, those two shiny aluminium plates should bounce a large part of the radiant heat straight back into the oven. But theory is patient, so let's see what reality has to say. At the start of the test, the thermometers read 31 degrees on the electronics box and 23 degrees underneath the oven. And after more than 2 hours at 900 degrees, those temperatures have barely budged. That's much better than I dared to hope for. And another hour later, now at 1050 degrees, there's still hardly any temperature rise in the electronics box or underneath the oven. So, a smaller oven, a much larger usable volume, and none of the annoying downsides, for less than €15. I'm very pleased with that result. See you in the next video. And if you feel like it, let me know what you think of this AI voice.